Okay, we are on, today's daf is 26. We are at 25b, Chaf Hey Amit Beis, in the Gemara. We've seen, the Gemara was talking about a karpef, a space not enclosed for livable space, a dwelling space. It was mainly a storage area or something like that. And in the middle, there was some sort of enclosure, and there was a machlokas of whether or not that enclosure would minimize this space, because there's a maximum space that you're allowed. You're allowed beis asayim, a two-seah area of a two-seah area of dwelling, non-dwelling. And over here, this was three seah, but he had covered one with a roof. And the question was, with that covering of a roof, was whether that's sufficient to minimize this base saw. And we saw this machlokas, to which Amar Rav Zera. Rav Zera said, and this is the second line of 25b of Chaf Hamad Beis. I will agree to you, if you have a karfef, a wood storage area, which was just exactly beis asayim, it's exactly the two-seah planting area, which is 100 by 50 or 70 by 70 and change, and it is completely open on one side to a proper courtyard. The courtyard has multiple homes in there, and it's enclosed, but it is enclosed with an opening directly into this karpef, into this wood storage area. But from the wood storage area, it's completely open to the backyard. The backyard being wider than the wood storage area, so the yard itself is going to have an enclosure on all four sides. But the wood storage area is actually going to have only three walls, because the one side is completely open to the backyard. So to that, Amar Rav Zera said, I would agree to you that there it's prohibited because now you've expanded the storage space, which is not enclosed for dwelling. That storage space is now going to be larger than beis asayim. So the Gemara is going to, in order to understand this, the Gemara is going to discuss the machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim in regards to multiple enclosed areas that have different status, that have the same status as far as private domain, public domain, but have different definitions. So we had this before, like a courtyard and the roof. Both of them are used by the inhabitants of the house, but one's primarily used for household chores and dwelling and living, and the roof less so. So Rabbi Shimon says, since they're both private domain, so as far as Shabbos, they're separate. They're one domain criteria, one domain definition, and therefore, even though they're separate domains, separate spaces, it has one halachic domain halacha, and you can carry from your courtyard onto the roof, or from the roof onto the courtyard, into the courtyard. And so similarly here, the wood storage area, the storage area itself is less than, is within the 2,000, the beis asayim, the 5,000 square alma, and therefore you're allowed to carry within there. And the courtyard itself is dwelling space, so you're allowed to carry in there. And now that the wall is open between these two spaces, you'd also be allowed to carry from one to the other. And that would then mean that since it's all one area now, because there's no wall between them, that adds to the 5,000 square alma. And since you're allowed to, since it adds to the 5,000 square alma, you now have larger than beis asayim, and it's going to be prohibited. That's what the Gemara understands Rabbi Zera to say. My time, because the airspace, the open space of the courtyard is added to the karpef, to the storage area, and now it's larger than beis asayim. Now it's larger than the maximum 5,000 square amma. Maskef la Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef challenged that. Is it possible that a space that you're allowed to carry from one to the other, that in and of itself would prohibit the next space? I'm allowed to carry from the courtyard to the karpef, from the chutzner to the karpef, from the courtyard to the storage area. And yet you're going to tell me that because they're open to each other, now it prohibits the other space from carrying? That doesn't make sense. And obviously this is according to Rabbi Shimon, that you're allowed to carry from one enclosed space to another enclosed space, since they're both rishus hayachid, they're both private domains enclosed. And so it'd be like from the courtyard to the roof. So too, from the courtyard to the karpef. Amalei Abaye Kaman Rabbi Shimon. This is according to Rabbi Shimon, as we just explained it. You're allowed to carry from two spaces in the same designation, from a courtyard to a karpef. Rabbi Shimon Ami ha'ika avir makom mechitzas. He says you're right. If the courtyard itself is the space that's going to be needed to add in order to prohibit this as too large, you'd be right. You would not count it. In other words, if the wood storage area was only 4,000 square amma, and the courtyard is 1,500 square amma, and now because they're open, you want to add the two, and they're going to end up being 5,500 square amma, right? 5,500 square amma. That's going to be too much. Okay, so it makes sense to say that according to Rabbi Shimon, we would not include the chutzner, which is a permissible space to carry from to and from the karpef, as prohibiting the karpef, because in and of itself it's made for dwelling, and you're allowed to carry from there to the karpef, so it can't be added to the tally in order to prohibit. Itself is dwelling space. Rather, the issue is not the courtyard, but the depth of the wall itself. And for that, he says that the scenario is that we were at an exact or almost exact 5,000 square amma, the max allowed in this storage area. And now that the wall comes down and the karpef is completely open to the courtyard, the depth of that wall, so let's say it's 1 amma thick wall by 10 amma. So you now have 10 square amma above what it was beforehand. And if this was 4,950, 499, it was nearly 5,000 square amma, and now you've added the depth of this wall, the thickness of the wall. Now you're over the 5,000 amma. That's where you're going to have the problem of it being too thick and too much space. And so it's not the chutzner itself, it's not the courtyard, it's the depth of the wall itself. Now, as Rav Chisda said, a karpef that is completely open to a chutzner, to a courtyard, chutzner muteres, the karpef also, the courtyard you're allowed to carry in, and the karpef you're not allowed to carry in. Now, what would be the scenario? My timer, chutzner my timer. Why can you carry in the courtyard? Must be the islegi pufi, because it has these additional walls. So if the courtyard itself is 30 amma wide, and the karpef is 10 amma wide, and the karpef is completely open to the courtyard, and the courtyard's enclosed by a fence, so even though that there's no wall between the courtyard and the karpef, and if you stand in the karpef, you don't see any barriers. But if you're standing in the courtyard, since it's 10, there's a 10 amma wall on either side of the karpef. So you, from the perspective of the courtyard, you actually have 4 walls with a gap that's allowed to the karpef, to the wood storage area, and therefore it's going to be permissible to carry in the courtyard. And since we see that, so we see that we're talking about that the courtyard itself is not what's prohibited, but it is the depth of the wall that's going to add to the count. So the Gemara says, wait, but it's possible the other way around. It's possible that the courtyard itself, the chutzner of the house, the courtyard is open completely to the wood storage area, and it's the wood storage area that has is wider and has a 4 walls just with a gap opening. And that would be prohibited. So it must be that the reason why he permitted carrying in the chutzner but not in the karpef is because the karpef is now too large on account of the depth of the wall itself. Now the Gemara tells us a case of a garden that was open, that was in the backyard of a palace, of a large house. This essentially bustina is like a orchard, a tree garden. That was outside in the back of a palace, of a large house. Now, Rashi's interpretation of this is that the palace itself had an outer wall that was added in order to enclose this garden, because the garden itself is not going to be a dwelling space. Now I have to make a new enclosure in order to make the dwelling space open to dwelling, and therefore it's going to be enclosed for dwelling. You're allowed to have even this larger than a base asayim, larger than a Tues planting area, more than 5,000 square amma as the space. And so that's what it was. And they built this outer wall of the house, but it was a part of the structure of the house itself. Tues says no, it was an additional fence added in front of the wall, a separate wall. Either way, there was an enclosure made for the bustana, for this tree garden. Savar Babel Meimer lismach and there was it was reliant on, or it was near the house wall. And now the outer wall of this house, or this, according to Tosfos, this additional wall that was added, it collapsed. And so now, according to Rashi, the garden is completely open to the bottom floor of this structure, of this home. So Rabbi wanted to rely on the outer wall, meaning the front wall of the house, saying, look, it's true that the back wall of the house is completely breached, and it's open, and the garden is open into the bottom floor of the building, but the front wall of the building is still intact. So even though the enclosure of the garden area has collapsed and is now open to the house, but the house has a front wall. That's the way Rashi learned. Tues is different, as we said. So he wanted to rely on the front wall of the house. So Rapapi. So Rapapi said to him, wait, because you come from the family of Abaye, who were the descendants of Eli, who on account of the curse had short lives. On account of that, Amrisa Mili Mili, are you saying short thoughts? You didn't think it through? The outer wall of the front of the house is not made for the backyard. It's made for inside the house. It's not made for the backyard. So it's not a barrier that you could say is enclosing the garden area. It's not made for the inside of the garden. So he said that does not work. The next case is also, there are two interpretations according to Rashi. Rashi brings the first interpretation, then he brings later on Daf Chavav, and towards the end he brings an interpretation from the Bahag, from the Gaonim. So we're going to go with the second interpretation, but the first interpretation is basically there's this tree that was made for shade, and it was a very large tree, and people would sit underneath it, and it was in the house of the Reish Galusa, of the Reish Galusa's backyard, and they wanted to be able to go out there with the food on Shabbos, and so the fix was building a little enclosure out of rods, out of basically a reed less than 3 tefachim apart, just slats all around, and they made this little enclosure, and that would be enough, since you now have a dwelling space in the middle as a guard's hut or something. That would be sufficient. That's the first interpretation of Rashi. But we're going to go with the second interpretation of Rashi, is that it was more like a gazebo in the middle, and what they did was they built a path fenced in by putting a bunch of slats, reeds, along this path up to this gazebo. So Varnica, there was this, we'll go with the second interpretation, it was this gazebo, the Havale Reish Kalvasa, which the Reish Galusa had, Babustanai, in his tree garden. Amalei Rav Huna bar Chinana, he said to Rav Huna bar Chinana, take care of this for me, because I want to go out there and have some bread and chat, and on Shabbos rest underneath this tree, underneath this gazebo. Fix it up and make it halachically acceptable that we can carry out our food out there. So he made this path with reeds along it, and each one of the reeds that was the poles that were put into the ground were less than 3 tefachim apart. And so we know as Lavan it's considered one solid wall. So he made this picket fence, and that was enough. Rava said, this is totally unnecessary, and it's going to teach the students the wrong halacha. Let's remove this before Shabbos so nobody thinks that this is necessary. Azar Rava Shalfinu. And furthermore, Azar of Papa Rav Huna of Yeshua, Naktinim Basrei. They took it away from where Rava just pulled it out and put it on the ground. They took it away so nobody goes and puts it back in on Shabbos, before Shabbos, to make it. Lamachar, but the next day when they realized what happened, they said, hey, there's actually a halachic problem here, and they started challenging Rava by saying, was this really correct? And we now Chavavam and Aleph, and the third line. So the next day they asked Ravina L'Rava. Ravina challenged Rava. Ir Chadasha, you have a new city. So this is an enclosed city. It's got a wall around it, but it's not completely inhabited. And now when you want to measure what are the boundaries of that city that you can carry from there outward to, not that you can carry, that you can travel from there outward 2,000 amma. So you don't measure from the wall enclosure, but rather from the last houses, because the wall doesn't count, because it's a new dwelling. Meaning, even though you have a wall around it, that outer wall is not going to count on account because of that the lack of dwelling. So when you put a new dwelling in there, it's only the new dwelling that's valid. So over here also, this gazebo is not sufficient to say that you can carry within there, because you have a fence, because you have a fence around the garden, this tree garden. The tree garden itself was enclosed for non-dwelling, and adding the gazebo in there is not sufficient. You have to make the picket fence up to the dwelling space. But it's only in a city that is an old city, meaning it was inhabited. And then you built a wall around it, so it was all the way up to the walls. Then you count from the walls. Now, ezi chadasha, ezi yishana. What counts as a new development, and what is an old development? Chadasha shehukaf el b'seif yashva. That first you had the fence around it, the wall around the city, and then you built the dwellings within there. Yishana yashva b'seif hukfa. And the old city is where you first had the houses there, and then you built the wall around it. So too over here, it was first enclosed, and then you added dwelling in there, and so it wouldn't be sufficient, and therefore you need to have the picket fence that Rav Huna at first put in and that you pulled out. You would have needed that in order to carry on Shabbos, and to carry in there to the gazebo. Amalei Rav Papa L'Rava. Rav Papa said to Rava another question. V'amar Abasi. Ravasi said, "Mechitzas darkelin." This is a temporary wall that that construction workers put up in order to protect themselves from the sun, so that they can work in shade. So basically, think of a tarp on poles that they put up to give them shade. So adarka lishmei mechitza, it does not count as a mechitza, and it doesn't, and you can't count it as an enclosure. Alma kivin l'tzniusa avida, since it's just made for shade and it's temporary, and then it'll be taken down. And it's only made for now. It's not a dwelling space. It doesn't count as a dwelling enclosure. Lo have a mechitza, so it's not going to count as a mechitza. So too, the walls around this garden were not made for dwelling. They were made just to give privacy when somebody's taking a walk in their garden, and under the trees and in between these beautiful. The beautiful garden, but it's made for privacy. It's not made for dwelling, and so it's another reason it wouldn't count as an enclosure. Furthermore, Amalei Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yeshua l'Rava. Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yeshua said to Rava, "Va'amar Rav Huna." We have a teaching named Rav Huna. Mechitza asuya lanachas. The barrier that's not made for dwelling, but rather it's made so that you can put some stuff down there and it'll stay protected. It's for the temporary protection of items, but not actually for dwelling. It doesn't count as a proper dwelling place, and therefore it's not going to count as the barrier. So you, Rava, wanted to rely on the outer wall of this garden. We have three reasons that it would not work. One, because the original enclosure was not for dwelling. You put in the gazebo afterwards. And we see from the halachas of what counts as a city in order to point to the distance of where you can travel. If the walls came first and then the city and then the development of houses, that's not going to count as the wall's not going to count as your dwelling spaces, only the houses. So you see that the wall doesn't count. Also, temporary walls for the protection of construction workers doesn't count as an enclosure. So you see that if it's not made for dwelling, it's just made temporarily for privacy, it doesn't count as a barrier. And the third is the teaching of Rav Huna that if it's just made to protect an item, that's not going to count as a mechitza for Shabbos either. So the walls around this garden should not count, and therefore we really do need the gifufi, these picket fence, these reeds, these kanim that he had put in. And how do I know that this is the opinion of Rav Huna? Because Rabbi Bar Avua, when he made an eruv around the city of Mechuzah, he didn't do it around the whole city. You know what he did? He made it each neighborhood separately. And why? Because they would have between the neighborhoods, even though that the neighborhoods themselves were livable, and he put proper barriers around each of the neighborhoods, and he put a lechi there at each alleyway, but each neighborhood he did separately, because between the neighborhoods they'd have these pits that they would dump their animal feed into, and the cows would go there to eat. And so those pits themselves were a karpef, a space that would prohibit the carrying across. And so he made an eruv separately in each area. Now, even though that had some enclosure there, it did have the enclosure around that pit. It has a barrier there, but that barrier is just there to protect the feed of the animal, and that therefore is not going to count as an enclosure. So he made a separate enclosure for the neighborhood. So the Reish Galusa said, "Oh my goodness! All I asked for you, Chachamim, was to fix the eruv, and you couldn't get it right before Shabbos. So he said, Chachamim They are Chachamim, the great wise people, but before Shabbos they didn't challenge Rava. On Shabbos they're challenging Rava, and Rava already had taken it out, and at this point it's too late to make the barriers. So they are Chachamim, they know how to break it, but they don't know how to fix it. They don't know how to make it right. The Mishnah had said 3 statements Rabbi Lai said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, even though that he had said it in the name of his teacher, he was seeking someone else that had also heard it from the teacher to make sure that he got it right, and he didn't find anybody else that had heard this from Rabbi Eliezer. So what are the 3 statements? One was that not only can you enclose something that the space doesn't have to be 2 base cell, which is 5,000 square amma, but it could be even base kur, much larger amount of seah, 40 seah. So masnita the leke Hanania. So this Mishnah must be not like Hanania. The Tani we learned Hanania says it can even be not only 30 saw, but even 40 saw would be sufficient, which is the backyards of palaces. Even if it's as large as palatial backyards, it'll also be okay. Because they walk there and they take and therefore that's considered a dwelling. They both learn it from one place. For it says, it says that Yeshayahu did not go out to the central courtyard. But however, that's the way we read it. But the ksiv is ha'ir. It's written to the central city. The karinan chatzar, but we read it as the courtyard. So why is it read as courtyard if it's written city? Because the courtyard is that large. So we see Mikalas Ratisha Melech, because when he went out to the king's courtyard when he was sick, the courtyard of the king, it was the size of a little village, of a mini village, a mid-sized village. Now, what's the machlok? One says that a mid-sized city, a mid-sized village of a king is going to be a base core, and he says no, it's even more. It's a mar savar that it's 40 seah planting area. So what was Yeshayahu doing there? Now we mentioned the story that he went in to check on the king, and then he went out into the courtyard. So what was he doing there? When he went to visit the king, Chizkiyahu, Chizkiyahu was sick. So when he went out of the palace, he didn't just leave. He set up a teaching Torah right at the door of the palace in the courtyard of the king as a merit for the healing of the king. And he went and he established a teaching at the door of the king of the palace. The Gemara says, no, maybe that's not a good idea to set that up. Maybe when you start teaching, there's going to be arguments in halacha, and what's going to happen is that's going to bring a kitrug, that's going to bring a judgment on them. And that's going to bring the satan to fight them. Okay. I heard another halacha from him, which was the halacha that if you had a courtyard with many houses living in there, and one person forgot to give his bread to share the shared meal, which would now make the courtyard a shared space and permissible to carry from the houses into the courtyard and from the courtyard into the houses. And one person forgot. And so what he's going to do is he's going to forfeit his right to the courtyard space. And since he forfeited the courtyard space, now everybody's allowed to carry, he's not allowed to carry from his house to the courtyard or vice versa. But everybody else is allowed to carry not only from their houses into the courtyard and vice versa, but they can even carry from his house to the courtyard and back. As we said, because essentially he's forfeiting his space in the courtyard, he's forfeiting the space in the house as well. And the Gemara is going to explain this. The idea, essentially, that the Gemara is going to come to is a machlokas of whether or not, when can you live in a house without living in the courtyard? As I mentioned a number of times now, the homes were very small. It had a sleeping space and maybe a sitting space, but the chores of the home, most of the household work was done in the courtyard. There was a stove there. There was washing clothing there. So the courtyard was a part of the dwelling space. Can a person live in the house alone without that? If they forfeited their living space, did they automatically or by assumption forfeit the living space as well? That's one question. And that's one way. Or do we say no? Guests don't need a living space beyond just a sitting space and a sleeping space. So you see that you can have just that, and you don't need to be cooking and cleaning and have other chore space that are done in the courtyard. And so that's a machlokas over here we're going to see of whether or not automatically when he forfeits his part of the courtyard to his neighbors in the courtyard so that they can carry there on Shabbos, and he's not a part owner because he didn't join in the meal, do we also say that the house becomes now open to the courtyard, and therefore they can carry in and out because it's a part of the joint living space, even though he's in there, but he's just like a guest, or not? So that if one person forgot to join in the meal, he may not carry, but they may. So what's the case? We learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eli says that he's not allowed to carry from his house to the courtyard and back. However, the people of the courtyard may carry not only in their own houses in and out, but also to his house in and out. But the Brisa says that he and they may not carry from his house in and out. That's not a question, and we turn to Chav Vav Amud Beis 26b. Ha Rabbi Eliezer, ha Rabbanan. The distinction is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan, and Rabbi Eli said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, and the Chachamim disagree. And what's the difference? Rabbi Eliezer, Hamavatal Rishus Chabetzera Rishus Beisei Bitel. According to Rabbi Eliezer, what we say is that the person who forfeited his right in the courtyard space because he didn't join in the meal also forfeited the rights to his house, and he's just a guest in his own house. Everybody else in the courtyard essentially has rights to his apartment, and therefore they can all carry in and out. He can't because he's not joined in the communal meal, but they can because it's just like courtyard space. His private house is now open to them. However, the Rabbanan say, and this is the halacha, somebody who forfeits his right to the courtyard space has not forfeited his own home space. So Gemara says, Pshita. This is an obvious point. This is needed for the idea of when there are multiple people, 5 people living in a courtyard. 5 is just an example. There are multiple people living in a courtyard, and one of them forgot to join in the joint meal. According to Rabbi Eliezer, when he forfeits his right, he doesn't have to tell each one of them, by the way, I forfeit my rights in the courtyard to you, and I forfeit my rights to the courtyard to you, and I forfeit my rights in the courtyard to you. But rather, it's sufficient to do to one. And because the idea is that when somebody reneges on their rights to the courtyard, they're reneging in a way that it's livable. ba'ayin yafa. He's doing so in a gracious and complete way, and therefore we don't say, look, he only says he's he's relinquishing his rights to the courtyard. Well, that's all it is. No, since the courtyard living is a part of the home living, and he can't really live in a house without the courtyard. So we understand that when he said, "I'm relinquishing the rights, my rights to my rights to the courtyard," I'm not only doing it for myself, I'm doing it for others as well, and for the house as well. Every part of it. It's a bigger, it's a more gracious and largesse relinquishing of rights, and therefore the house would be included. However, the Rabbanan say no, it's only whatever he said, and therefore we cannot assume that if he said it to one, he said it to the others. He has to say it to each person, and therefore also, if he only said the house, the courtyard, we assume the house is not included. Well, what about this brisa that said 5 people that dwell in a chatzar? And again, this is just a general term. 5, it could be 10, it could be 4, but the idea is there are multiple dwellers in this courtyard. And one of them forgot and did not join in the meal. When he reneges, when he relinquishes his rights to the courtyard, he doesn't have to tell each person. Come on, Rabbi Eliezer. That's obvious, like Rabbi Eliezer, as we said, he saw that. So that's whose opinion this is. Rav Kahana Masni Hachi. However, Kahana teaches it this way, as we just said it. However, Rav Tzvi Masni Hachi, he teaches this way. Kaman Ozla Hadatanya. Whose opinion is this that we just said? Hey, Shashruim B'Chatzer. There are 5 people sitting in a dwelling in a courtyard. So they each have a home in this courtyard. And one of them didn't join in the meal. He doesn't have to relinquish his rights to each person in the courtyard, but rather he's relinquishing his rights to one, and we can assume he means for everyone because of the largesse, because of the idea that obviously what he means is that it should be permissible to carry in there, and he is being gracious and totally relinquishing his rights there. Come on, come on, Rabbi Eliezer. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Amar le Rav Papa Labai. So Rav Papa asked Abaye, le Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that when he relinquishes his rights in the courtyard, we understand that he means also the house, because it's not really livable without that, and we understand that Ba'ayin Yafe is doing so in a more gracious way. If he says explicitly, I'm not relinquishing my rights to the house, I'm only relinquishing the rights to the courtyard, but not the house, does that work? Do we say, look, it doesn't matter what you say, because after all, you can't really have a living space in a house without a courtyard, because it was too small, it was not usable. You need the courtyard for basic living. Or do we say, and therefore it doesn't matter what you say? Or do we say, no, it's just a matter of assumption. We're assuming he's being gracious and large and relinquishing his rights not only to the courtyard but also to the house. But in general, we can't. If he says explicitly, I'm not doing that, we can't say, look, it happens automatically. It's not automatic. It's not automatic. It's just the assumption of what he intended. And similarly, Rabbanan Yama Bevatilna. Or according to the Rabbanan, that you say that he doesn't automatically relinquish his rights to the courtyard, and then by extension the house. When he says the courtyard, it's only the courtyard. What happens if he explicitly said the courtyard and I'm relinquishing my rights to the house? Do we say that that's a proper relinquishment? My time in the Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says, what's the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer? Is it because that when he relinquished the rights to his courtyard, he relinquished the house, and therefore he said, no, I'm not doing that, and so therefore we can't assume he meant the house, because he expressly said he does not mean the house. Or Dilma, perhaps, or is the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer because it's just not a proper dwelling. There is no such thing as a healthy dwelling of just in the house, which doesn't have a courtyard where you do most of the house chores. And therefore, if he says, "Look, I'm relinquishing my rights to the courtyard," it automatically means I'm relinquishing the rights to the house because there is no such. It's not a proper dwelling. And if I say, "Well, I want to retain the rights to the dwelling," well, the dwelling is not a dwelling without the courtyard. And so once you've relinquished the courtyard, it is already no longer a dwelling, and you've relinquished the rights to the house as well. And even if he says, "Look, I'll live I like this as a guest," it's nothing. The space of the house is now a part of the courtyard, and it's relinquished to everyone. They can carry into the house according to Rabbi Eliezer, and he's living there in his own house as a guest for that Shabbos. And similarly, according to Rabbanan, my question is, if he says, "I'm relinquishing my house as well," my time of the Rabbanan, what's the basis for the Rabbanan? The Kasavrim Avat Roshus Chatzer Roshus basically Bitil. It's not assumed that he's also intends to relinquish the house. And he said, "I am," so therefore we accept it. Or is the reasoning of the Chachamim because a person is not going to totally relinquish his rights to his own space in this house and courtyard. To the courtyard, perhaps, but if he says he's relinquishing his house, he's really not, and therefore wouldn't count. The person doesn't make himself a guest in his own house. And therefore, when he says that, it just doesn't work. You cannot relinquish the rights to your own house unless you're moving out. So to which Abaye responded to Rav Papa, he said, "Good question. Both according to Rabbi Eliezer and according to Rabbanan, Kivan the Gali, Daite Gali. Whatever he states. The assumption is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, when he just says the Chatzar, just says I'm relinquishing courtyard, it includes the house. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, when he just says I relinquish the house, the courtyard, it does not include the house. Chachamim, it does not include the house. However, if he expressly says I am not including the house, or I am including the house, of course, whatever he said is what he's relinquishing, and that's what works. The last statement that Rabbi Eli said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer was that the what's kosher for Mar on Pesach. You can use our kablin for Mar. My our kablin. What is this herb that is Mar? Shlaka says Atzvasa charuzi isa. It's a sort of vine that grows around a certain tree, some type of palm tree, and it's bitter. It's sorry, it's a type of vine, and that would be bitter enough to be to fulfill the mitzvah of Mar. Haner lachos and pasim. With this, we complete the second parak of Eruvin, and we should come back to you on some pasim be'ez Hashem Yisparach. Have a great Shabbos, everybody.